Can you hear me? I really want you to hear me, ladies. If you have ever laid in bed at 2 or 3 in the morning, completely soaked through your shirt, drenched, or maybe your heart is pounding for no reason at all, wondering to yourself if you are dying, if you are losing your mind, maybe even both, I need you to hear me, and I need you to hear me say this clearly. You are not crazy and you are not alone. In fact, 1 in 2 women with ovaries will live through that exact moment, wide awake, drenched, scared. And if you're anything like me, you're Googling symptoms at 3 in the morning because you feel like you're dying and nobody warned us. Nobody sat us down. Nobody said, here's what's coming, here's why, and here's what we can do about it. So today, we're going to change that. We're going to sit down together, like we're at my kitchen table downstairs, and we're going to talk about all of it. But before we get into it, there are 3 things that I need to cover very quickly, but are extremely important. Number one, I am not a doctor, a nurse practitioner, or a medical provider of any kind. Okay? Not, don't come at me. Number two, everything we talk about today is for education and information only. It is not personal medical advice. And number three, please take what we cover here and bring it to your own doctor, your own nurse, your own practitioner, your own, medical team, because your body, your history, and your labs are yours alone. And there's no video, including this one, that can replace a real conversation with your provider who knows your chart, knows your history, and knows you. Now, we have that out of the way, and I want to get into all the goodness because that's what you're here for. Now, ladies, if you are already on the other side of this like I am, if your periods have been gone for a year or more, or if a doctor recently told you, congratulations, high five, you are officially postmenopausal, and you thought that meant the hard part was over, you thought that it was behind you, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry to tell you that it's not. It is not over. It's different, but it's not over. And I also don't want us to think as postmenopause as a finish line. It's not something that we cross and then we jump right back into normal life. In reality, for most of us, it is actually the longest chapter of our whole life. And nobody during this time, no one sat us down and told us what we could actually expect once we got here. And if you're anything like me, you're standing in your closet one day and you're wondering, as I have several hundred times, how did I get here? What in the world happened? Why doesn't anything fit the same? Even though I have not changed a thing about how I eat. Maybe you are still waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning, staring at that forsaken ceiling for no reason at all. Maybe it just feels like your body quietly changed the rules on you without asking for your permission first, which in my opinion is very disrespectful. Just saying. I hear you. And like I said earlier, we are not crazy and we are not alone. Now, if you are a woman that is still in the thick of the transition itself, meaning you are still tracking irregular periods and you're wondering when all of this is going to stop, when is it all going to just go away? I want you to know that this conversation is for you too, because understanding where we are headed changes how we actually experience getting there, right? So we want to make sure that we cover all the bases. This is a good way to prepare for all of it. So today we are going to talk through all of the things, but we're going to do it slowly, one piece at a time. We're going to talk about the hormones, the stages, a couple of big studies, but I will explain them as simple as possible. And I'm not going to throw them all at you at once. We're going to also talk about some really amazing doctors who are finally telling the truth and are making it their priority to help women during these transitions. We're going to talk a little bit about the blood work, the bone scans, and we're even going to talk a little bit about the supplements that are not what they claim to be. And finally, we are going to talk about the questions we deserve to ask our providers. And we're going to feel comfortable asking those questions without apologizing for any of it. And that's important. Now, as a fair warning, this video is going to be a long one, and that's intentional because I would honestly rather give you the whole picture than rush through it and leave you more confused than when we started, right? That's not the goal. The goal is to get you to feel better and feel a better understanding of what's happening. So I want you to go grab your tea, grab your water. I want you to get comfy, maybe even grab a pen and paper. But I want you to stay with me. I want you to stay with me until the end. So let's get started. And we're going to start at the very beginning, you know, because to really understand menopause, we first have to understand our whole hormonal history and our story, all the way from birth until now. And don't worry, I'm going to keep this as high level as possible because, of course, I don't want to bore you and I definitely don't want to lose you. That would not be completing the goal, right? But I will promise you that it will be worth it. So, for starters, when we are born, our ovaries already hold every egg we will ever have in our whole life, somewhere around 1 to 2 million of them. We do not make new ones and never will. We are simply born with our entire lifetime supply right from the start. And then by the time puberty hits, that number has already dropped to around 300,000 to 400,000. And then a little later, when we have these two close cousins that emerge, estrogen and progesterone. They step in and they basically run the show for the next 3 to 4 decades. They regulate our monthly cycles, our bone density, our mood, our skin, our heart, our brain. They pretty much handle every single system that we have. Now, let's get into some hard facts. Somewhere in our 30s, usually to late 30s, our hormone production starts to decline. This happens quietly, it happens gradually, and it happens long before we ever see it on a calendar or we even feel it in our very first hot flash. That means perimenopause, the transition into menopause, does not really begin in our 50s like a lot of us were told. For many of us, it actually begins in our late 30s. Yes, our late 30s, and sometimes even earlier. And it can last anywhere from 4 to 10 years. For some women, it can last longer. And during that stretch of 4 to 10 years, our hormones do not just gently taper off in a nice, neat line. They swing. Estrogen can spike higher than usual 1 week, and then the following week, it crashes. During this time, progesterone tends to decline earlier and it happens more steadily. It is genuinely a roller coaster. And that roller coaster is exactly why so many of us feel like we do not recognize ourselves anymore. This is when we really start to notice changes. That rage that comes out of nowhere, the anxiety that was never there before, the brain fog in the middle of a work meeting, the sleep that never happens. If you have ever laid there at night staring at the ceiling because your eyes decided that you didn't want to sleep anymore, and when you look at the clock, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and you start going down the laundry list of thoughts racing in your brain, right? They're on constant loop. You ask yourself, is this just stress? Am I losing my mind? Why can't I remember a simple word I have used my entire life? I need you to hear me. I want you to hear me loud and clear. These are not character flaws, okay? These are actual hormones. These are our hormones that are doing all of this to us. Okay, so now that we know our hormones are running the show and causing havoc that we never asked for, let us actually talk about what they are and what they do. Because I think this is the piece that gets skipped the most and it has a lot of weight, and I want us to talk about it. Let's first start with estrogen. Estrogen is not just a reproductive hormone, and I need to make that very clear. I want us to all understand that estrogen is not just a reproductive hormone. I want you to think of estrogen almost like a key, and our body has locks for it everywhere. Our brain, our heart, our blood vessels, our bones, our skin, our bladder, our vaginal tissue, our gut, even our joints. When estrogen is swimming gracefully in our body and is in abundance and is in good supply, it helps to keep our blood vessels flexible, our cholesterol balanced, our bones dense. It keeps our brain sharp. Our skin is rich. Our skin collagen is rich and supple. Our vaginal and urinary tissue is thick and healthy. Progesterone works alongside it, calming our nervous system, supporting our sleep, and playing a role in our mood stability. Thank you so much, progesterone. And testosterone, yes, we have it too. We just have it in smaller amounts than men. But testosterone actually supports our energy. It supports our muscle mass, our bone strength, our sharpness, and our libido, also known as our sex drive. Dr. Jessica Shepard, an OBGYN and the author of a book called Generation M, has said the thing that stuck her the most, even after years of medical training, was realizing just how much of a woman's whole life, socially, sexually, emotionally, physically, are all quietly connected to estrogen. So when these three hormones are humming along in our 20s and 30s, they are at their prime, we don't really think about it. It is only when they start to decline that we realize just how much they were doing for us this entire time. Okay. And now that we understand the hormones themselves, let us get clear on the three stages of menopause, because honestly, this is where most of the confusion lives. There are three parts to menopause. The first is perimenopause. This is the transition, the years leading up to our final period. This is when our hormones are fluctuating rather than just keeping low, right? Rather than just being low. It can start in our late 30s or early 40s, and it can last anywhere from 4 to 10 years, sometimes as long as 14 for some women. This is the stage where symptoms often start. This is when we start to notice things changing up. Menopause, the term menopause itself, is actually just one day. It is the day that marks 12 full months since our last period. That is it, just one day. Everything before that day is perimenopause, and everything after that day and for the rest of our lives is post-menopause. And post-menopause is not some brief little phase. In fact, it is 30, 40, sometimes 50 years of our lives lived without the hormone production our body had from adolescence right up to our post-menopause stage. The average age of menopause in the United States sits around 51 to 52, with most of us landing somewhere between 45 and 58. I know it's a big range. So when someone says, I'm going through menopause, what they very often actually mean is, I am in perimenopause. And that distinction matters. The one between perimenopause and postmenopause, because it changes what symptoms make sense. It changes what treatment options make sense and what conversations we need to be actually having with our providers. Okay, now a lot of you are watching this video. You're already living in postmenopause, which is why I want to slow down a little bit, because what I am about to say is very important. Postmenopause is not some small footnote at the end of our story. This is not the end for us. The truth is that women are living longer these days. And that means that the average woman spends close to a third, maybe even 40% of her entire life in postmenopause. This is 30 years or more after she's had her last period. That is not a brief stage. It's not a moment, and it's not a phase. We are talking decades. And these postmenopausal years, they deserve just as much care and attention and joy and love as every single stage that came before it. Postmenopause is also, it keeps changing things quietly, and it happens in ways that nobody really warned us about. Our skin gets thinner and it gets drier. Our hair can thin out, it can fall out. Our sleep gets harder to really sink into, even when we are exhausted. And for a lot of us, sleep becomes non-existent. We almost feel like we're insomniacs. Some of us may notice a different kind of mood shift, and it's not the sharp anxiety of menopause. It's something more quieter, something heavier. The mood shift just lingers. Maybe you have told a friend, I really thought I would start feeling like myself again by now. If you are someone that has thought or shared those words, please hear me. There's nothing wrong with you. Your body is adjusting still, and those thoughts and feelings deserve a real conversation with your doctor. It definitely does not warrant a shrug followed by, well, it's just menopause and you'll be fine. No, this is serious and it's real. If your doctor doesn't meet you where you are, it may be time to find another doctor. But we will talk about that a little later. Let us shift gears for a second, and I want us to talk about what actually shows up during all of this, because it is so much more than hot flashes, even though hot flashes get all of the attention. Here's a hard fact. Roughly 75 to 80% of us will deal with what doctors call vasomotor symptoms, which is really just a fancy way of saying hot flashes and night sweats. Vasomotor symptoms is the medical term. And for a lot of us, They do not just last a couple of years like we were told. Research followed women over more than a decade, found that for those of us whose hot flashes started earlier during perimenopause, the hot flashes tend to stick around for an average of 11 to 12 years. It's not the 2 to 5 years that many of us, are expecting or that we were told at some point. And guess what? It does not stop with hot flashes. So sorry. We also experience sleep disruption, brain fog, joint aches, mood swings, ringing in the ears, frozen shoulder, hip pain, anxiety that feels new and different, heart palpitations that make us feel like we're having a heart attack. We experience changes in our skin and hair starts falling out or thinning. We suffer from vaginal dryness, shifts in our libido, our sex drive. This is all part of that same hormonal story, a story that feels like it is never going to end. So let us actually walk through a few of these together. I want to do them one at a time because they're all important, but we need to take them slow. Okay. Let us start with our heart because honestly, this is the one that stops me in my tracks every single time I read the numbers. They are so alarming. Let's start with saying that heart disease is the leading cause of death for women, full stop. Heart disease is responsible for roughly 1 in every 5 female deaths in this country, in the United States. Picture this. You go in for your annual physical. Everything comes back looking great. Blood pressure fine, cholesterol fine. But you walk out of that appointment feeling like something in your body is a little off. You just don't feel right, but you can't really explain it. Then you start to second guess yourself, wondering, am I making all of this stuff up? Is this all in my head? But I'm here to tell you that it is not. Those feelings, your gut, that's all real. And those feelings are worth paying attention to. And we will come back to why in a second. Before menopause, estrogen actually offers us real protection, a lot of protection, keeping our arteries flexible and our cholesterol more balanced. This is a big part of why heart disease tends to show up in women about 7 to 10 years later than it does men. Once estrogen declines, that protection that it offers, it declines right along with it. And our heart risk starts to climb, but it happens quietly, most of the time without any symptoms. And this goes on for years before anything even shows up on a standard test. This is why I don't want you to feel like you're making things up. I want to share with you a specific study worth knowing by name, specifically as we are talking about our heart as women. Back in 2020, the American Heart Association put out a formal statement on exactly this topic. It is called Menopause Transition and Cardiovascular Disease Risk. In this statement by the American Heart Association, they say that they looked at decades of research and something important. The statement said that the menopause transition itself is its own window of higher cardiovascular risk. This cardiovascular risk is not just a coincidence of getting older. The American Heart Association has called for earlier screening starting right around this menopause transition time instead of waiting until women are in their 60s and 70s. And that's a huge deal, especially coming from a major medical organization like the American Heart Association. Dr. Mary Claire Haver, a board certified OBGYN, has talked about a patient of hers with complete normal labs, normal blood pressure, a clean bill of health every single visit, who still ended up having a cardiac event years later. This is because the standard tests being run on her, the standard tests that were being run on her, they were not catching what was actually happening inside her arteries during her menopause transition. Dr. Jennifer Rowlands, an OBGYN trained in integrative medicine, talks about perimenopause as a real window of opportunity, meaning the choices we make and the screenings we push for right now can lower our heart disease risk for decades to come and not just help us feel better today. I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you this because I want you to walk into your next appointment and I want you to ask for the right screening and I want you to ask for it at the right time. Knowledge is power. Self advocacy is paramount when talking to your doctor about preventative care. And our heart is important. So we need to bring this up. Now, let us shift our attention now and talk about our bones because this one is silent until suddenly it is not. Think about someone in your life, maybe your grandmother, maybe your aunt, who took a small fall and ended up with a broken hip. And everything changed for her after that. For a lot of families, that fall is the very first sign anyone gets that bones had already been thinning for years. And for this conversation, I want to bring someone in who talks about bone health unlike almost anyone else out there. Her name is Dr. Vonda Wright, and she's a double board certified orthopedic surgeon, meaning she has literally operated on broken bones for over 2 decades. She actually coined a term I think every one of us needs to know. She calls it the musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause, which is really just a way of describing how our joints, our muscles, and our bones, how they all get affected at the same time during our menopause transition. Okay, it's musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause. Her research, which was published in 2023, found that more than 70% of women deal with some kind of joint pain, muscle loss, or bone density change as they move through perimenopause and menopause. And here is a number worth remembering. Many of us can lose up to 20% of our bone density in just the first 5 to 7 years after our last period. 20% in the first 5 to 7 years after our last period. I lost my period a long time ago. And I love that Dr. Wright is constantly reminding us that frailty is not our destiny. She highlights that it is often the result of decades of misinformation and not some inevitable part of us getting older as women. What's important to understand is that when estrogen declines, bone breakdown starts happening faster than our body can rebuild it. And that shift can be really dramatic in exactly that window that Dr. Wright is describing. The reality is that roughly 1 in 3 women over 50 will unfortunately end up with a fracture related to osteoporosis at some point in her life. And even with this known statistic, less than half of the women 50 and older have ever had a DEXA scan. A DEXA scan is a simple, painless bone density test that can catch this early, long before a fracture actually happens. This is one of those moments where speaking up for ourselves changes everything because a DEXA scan is not automatically offered to most of us until the age of 65. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. But if menopause came early for you, or if you have a family history of osteoporosis, or you have other risk factors like smoking, it is absolutely worth asking your provider whether you should get screened sooner. It's definitely okay to bring up in conversation. And I encourage you to bring it up during your next doctor's visit, okay? I want you to talk about it openly. Knowledge is power. Now, I want to talk about our brain because, ladies, the brain fog is real, it is measurable, and it does not mean that we are losing our minds. You know, that moment when you're standing in the kitchen with the fridge door wide open and you genuinely cannot remember why you came in there. Like, why are you there? Why did you even open the door? Or you reach for a word you've used 1,000 times and it just will not come out of it won't come out of your mouth. Or you forget your words mid-sentence during a meeting. So embarrassing. It happened to me so many times. For the vast majority of us, I'm happy to say that it's not early dementia. Yay for us. We have estrogen receptors that sit through all parts of our brain that is responsible for memory and focus. So as estrogen fluctuates and then it declines, a lot of us go through genuine and noticeable temporary shifts in memory and mental clarity. Yes, this is part of it. Researchers have actually studied this directly, measuring verbal memory during the menopause transition, and the findings are consistent. Cognitive performance often dips a bit during perimenopause, and then for most of us, it tends to stabilize again once we reach postmenopause. Now, that word stabilize, that means that this memory loss thing is a season. It is not a life sentence. But in the moment, it can feel scary, embarrassing, and unsettling. This brain fog, forgetfulness, and memory loss, it deserves to be taken seriously by your doctor and not brushed off as stress or that you're just getting older. Okay, let's shift gears again and to talk about something we don't talk about nearly enough, and that is our urinary and vaginal health. This is the topic that gets whispered about, if it even gets talked about at all. And honestly, it shouldn't be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. Maybe you've caught yourself scoping out where's the nearest bathroom when you go out or in your own home before you even leave the house or the restaurant, just in case, when that never used to cross your mind before. Similar to other parts of a woman's body, the tissue in our bladder, urethra, and our vagina, it's full of estrogen receptors. So as estrogen declines, that tissue can get thinner, it can get drier and become less elastic. That can show up as dryness, discomfort during intimacy. You may experience more frequent urinary tract infections and or you have more urgency to urinate. But none of this is your fault. None of this is in your head. There is actually a medical term for this whole cluster of symptoms. It's called the genital urinary syndrome of menopause, or GSM for short. And unlike hot flashes, which tend to ease up over time, this one often does not improve on its own. It can actually get worse the longer it goes untreated. And ladies, we cannot ignore these symptoms or try to self treat. We must get this checked. Please get this checked. There are effective, well studied treatments for this, including low dose vaginal estrogen, which carries a very different risk profile than hormone therapy. This topic, your issues and symptoms are all worth bringing up directly with your doctor, even if it feels a little uncomfortable or maybe even awkward, because we deserve to feel comfortable in our own bodies at every single stage of life. And post menopause is no different. We deserve to feel comfortable. Now, I am going to hold both of your hands here while we are on this wonderful topic that everyone loves to talk about. Not. Let us talk about our sexual health too, because desire, arousal, and comfort during intimacy, they're all connected to the same hormonal shift that I've been talking about this entire time. Has a doctor ever asked you about your sex life and you just kind of brush it off? You pass the question because you're embarrassed, you're uncomfortable, and it just feels easier than actually explaining what has actually changed? A lot of women do this. It's normal. Dr. Kelly Casperson, a board certified urologist who has spent years focused on exactly this area of sexual health, has talked openly about how little training even experienced doctors like her get in this particular area, and how often women are just told that changes in libido, their sex drive, or a normal part, that they're a normal part of getting older. And that ends the conversation. No, absolutely not. This needs to be talked about. Telling you it's normal because you're getting older does not have to be, nor should it be, the end of the conversation. There are real evidence based options for this. There's local estrogen, there's testosterone therapy, and there's also non hormonal approaches. The first step is simply refusing to let that conversation get shut down. My suggestion would be to write your questions down on a piece of paper or maybe capture them in the notes app in your phone. If your issue is getting yourself to verbally answer the question, and if it is extremely uncomfortable for you, then maybe you can hand your doctor your phone or that piece of paper that you wrote them down, so that the doctor can read the questions to themselves and then they can look at you as they answer them, right? Figure out a way that works for you to get your questions answered. At the end of the day, we just need to get this addressed, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. Okay, let us talk about something that touches almost all of us, and that is our metabolism and our weight. Because this is one of the most common and most misunderstood parts of postmenopause. I know it was for me until I learned about it. And here's the thing, you're basically eating the same way you always have, maybe even eating better than you used to. And the number on that scale is still going up. Again, you ask yourself, what is happening? What is going on with me? And for this, I want to bring in Dr. Rocio Salas Whalen here. She is a triple board certified endocrinologist who focuses specifically on women's metabolic health. She talks a lot about belly fat during this stage, not for how it looks, but for what it actually means for our metabolism. Here's the thing, even without changing a single thing about how we eat, a lot of us gain somewhere between 1 to 1.5 pounds a year through our 50s and our 60s. And it really is not about willpower. I shared about my own personal struggle with weight gain in one of my previous videos. I know that I'm not the only one. As our estrogen declines, our bodies start storing fat differently. It shifts it away from our hips and thighs and begins to store it in our belly. And that visceral fat, the kind that sits around our organs, is metabolically active in a way that raises our risk for insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease. At the same time, we are naturally losing muscle as we age, and muscle is what keeps our metabolism running efficiently. So, having less muscle means we are burning fewer calories even when we are just sitting still. None of this means that our body is broken or that we did something wrong. It means that our body is doing exactly what it was designed to do when our hormones shift. Our bodies are machines, it is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. But what is important to understand here is that these normal changes in our body also means that our strategy and our approach have to shift too. We can no longer eat the same things. We need to increase our protein and fiber. We need to add more strength and resistance training. And for the love of all things that are great, we must get to a place where we have less body shaming, ladies. There is no room or place for that during this phase of our lives. We need to give ourselves some grace and educate ourselves on how we can make improvements. And this brings me to strength because if there is one thing I want every single woman watching this to walk away with and actually do this week, is to do strength and resistance training. Before you say no, send off all the alarms. Let me share this. Estrogen decline touches our muscle, it touches our bones and our metabolism all at the same time. And resistance training, meaning strength training with weights or resistance with bands, is one of the most protective things we can do during this whole transition. I think about the women who pick up a set of dumbbells for the first time in their 50s and tell me months later that they feel stronger than they did in their 30s. I know I've said this in a ton of my videos. That is not a coincidence. That is what happens when muscle finally gets the signal to rebuild. Dr. Vonda Wright, the orthopedic surgeon we talked about earlier, she has said her life's work is dispelling the myth that aging is just some inevitable slide from vitality to frailty. And the research backs her up. Postmenopausal women with low bone density have shown real measurable improvements in bone strength after just a few months of structured strength training. Now, we do not need to become bodybuilders here. We just need to pick up something a little heavier than we think we can. And we need to do this a minimal of 3 to 4 times a week. And we need to do this consistently. And we let our bodies adapt. Our bodies are amazing machines. They will adapt, and you will thank yourself later for starting. Now, I want to and need to slow things way down. And I want to walk you through one specific study from start to finish because I think it deserves to be understood properly, not just referenced as a part of something that's happened. And it's the study of the Women's Health Initiative, or the WHI. If you've ever hesitated to even bring up hormone therapy with your doctor, this study is probably the reason why, even if you've never actually read a page of it or a word of it. So let me just walk you through it very simply. And no, we're not going to spend a lot of time on the numbers or the science, but it is important to talk about because of the impact that this study has had on women, not just in the US, but all over the world. So back in the early 1990s, researchers started a massive study. Over 161,000 postmenopausal women, all between the ages of 50 and 79, they were treated at 40 medical centers across the country. Some of those women took part in trials specifically testing hormone therapy. Other women of that same trial were part of a much longer observational study. Altogether, This research has gone on to produce more than 2,400 published studies over the years. It is genuinely one of the biggest women's health studies ever done in this country. Full stop. Now, back in 2002, the first big findings from the hormone therapy part of the study came out, and they were reported as proof that hormone therapy significantly raised the risk of breast cancer, heart disease, and stroke. These headlines were terrifying. Cancer, heart disease, stroke? No, thank you. As you can very well imagine, right? Fear spread almost overnight. The saddest part is that hormone therapy use dropped across the entire country. And honestly, it never really recovered. It still affects women today. But here is what got left out of those headlines. The women in that original trial were, on average, in their early 60s, which is more than a decade past their last period. A lot of them were starting hormone therapy for the very first time, well outside the window when it tends to offer the most benefit and the least risk. So in the years since that study was published, researchers have gone back and they took a much closer look at that same data and they combined it with new research. And the picture that came out of that new research is a lot more distinct than what was originally, what was part of the original headlines that they told us. For women under 60, or within about 10 years of their last period, who do not have specific risk factors, a big formal review published in the Journal of the American Medical Association back in 2024, just 2 years ago, actually describes hormone therapy as an effective, appropriate option for moderate to severe symptoms with a risk profile that looks pretty different from what most of us grew up believing. Did your mom ever bring up hormone therapy with you? Or was it just one of those things that nobody in your family ever talked about? For me personally, and for most of us, no one in my family ever talked about menopause. And that is hurtful. What I know today is that silence has a real history behind it. Dr. Jessica Shepard talks about wanting to dismantle this myth about hormone therapy, this misrepresented WHI story that quietly took hormone therapy completely off the table for an entire generation of women. I am Gen X, so this was my mother's generation, and frankly, mine too. Dr. Sharon Malone, she's an OBGYN and the author of a book called Grown Women Talk, has been especially vocal about who got hurt the most by all of this. She's pointed out that hormone therapy is only prescribed to about 5% of symptomatic women in this country overall. Just 5% of the women. For Black women specifically, that number drops to less than 1%. Even though Black women often deal with the longest and the most severe menopause symptoms of anyone. Dr. Malone talks about how she practiced medicine both before and after those Women's Health Initiative headlines broke. And she has shared stories about watching that fear settle in and the fact that it never really lifted, especially for women of color who were already getting less access and less trust from the medical system to begin with. And here's the thing, if you have time to check her out and hear her talk about menopause, I 10 out of 10 highly recommend. She is amazing. Now, all of this does not mean that hormone therapy is right for everyone. I need to also say this. This is not something to self-prescribe based on any video, including this one. But what it does mean is that an entire generation of women, our mothers, and a lot of us too, we got steered away from a legitimate option because of the headlines that outran the actual science. And if you are already on hormone therapy, or if you're someone that had your last period many years ago and are wondering if it's too late to even start, here's something else most of us were never told. The old advice to use it for the shortest time possible and to stop by a certain age no matter what, that has changed. It's new. The current guidance from the Menopause Society is actually pretty clear now. And they say that there is no fixed arbitrary time limit. It is an individual decision. It is a decision that is based on your own symptoms, your own risk factors, and an ongoing open conversation with your provider. It is not based on some deadline on a calendar. Today, some of us will use it for a few years, some of us will use it for decades. And both can be completely appropriate and both are okay. For me personally, I have been on it for 2 years and my life has changed drastically for the better. And you're probably wondering, why did this fear stick around for so long? And why does it feel like so many of our doctors don't know much more about menopause than we do? I don't know if you've had this experience. I know that I have. Dr. Haver has talked very openly about receiving as little as 1 hour of menopause education during her entire 4 year medical school. And that's not even the worst of it. She shares that she received only about 6 hours total throughout her whole OBGYN residency. Make this make sense. Here she is, a doctor who is specializing in women's health in her medical profession, and she has only received 6 hours of lecture on the longest phase of a woman's life. That is beyond sad. Dr. Salis Whalen has also said something very similar. She shared that a lot of healthcare providers get just one class on their menopause in their entire training. This is exactly why so many of them miss the signs when a patient is sitting right there in front of them. Dr. Erica Montes, a board certified OBGYN and proudly one of the few Latina physicians in this country, has talked about building her own platform on social media, specifically because she saw how much representation was missing for Latina patients that are navigating this important stage of life too. Patients who deserved a doctor who understood their culture, that looked like them, and that understood their family context. This is something very important in the Latino culture. And guess what? Survey data backs all of this up. Most OBGYN program directors actually agree that menopause training does in fact belong in the curriculums. Yet, the fact still remains that only a small fraction of those programs actually formally include menopause. Most residents finish their training feeling genuinely unprepared to manage menopause care. The data backs that up. The medical specialist in the women's healthcare space that so many of us trust the most with this exact stage of life often get a handful of hours on it during their entire training. 4, 6, 8, 12 years. That is crazy. These teaching institutions should and must do better. And listen, this is not about blaming our doctors as people. Most of them are working really hard with the training that they were given. It is a known systemic gap. This is something that has been decades in the making. And it is exactly why doctors like Haver, Casperson, Malone, Shepard, Montes, Rollins, and Salas Whalen have built such big platforms because so many of us have been left to figure this out on our own. And while I'll say that I'm proud that we're doing a pretty good job, unfortunately, we're only scratching the surface. We can all do better. And that systemic gap, that has real consequences that go beyond just feeling unheard. Survey data suggests that the overwhelming majority of women, in upwards of 90%, got absolutely no formal education about menopause at all. Not in school, not at home, not from a doctor, nowhere. A lot of women live with symptoms that seriously affect their quality of life for 6 months, a year, or some for many years before they even bring it up to their doctor, a family member. And sadly, some of them don't ever bring it up. And when they finally do say something and or ask questions, sometimes they get handed antidepressants or told to just push through it. Or in some cases, they end up with procedures or surgeries that were not actually necessary. When the real root cause was hormonal the whole time. Dr. Mary Claire Haver goes into a lot of depth about this. I am not saying that some of these options were not valid given their specific circumstances, nor am I going to point fingers at any one doctor. I'm bringing it up to highlight a pattern so that those of us listening to this video right here, that we can recognize it if it happens to us, if it happens to our loved ones, and so that we know that we have every right to ask more. We have every right to ask more information, more data, and definitely ask for more answers. You have that right. And this brings me to something I promised you at the very start. And I'm saying this with every ounce of love I have in my soul. I want you to know that it is okay for you to fire your doctor. Let me say that again, slowly. Because if you're anything like me and the way that I was raised, we were raised to treat our doctor's word as the final word, especially as women, especially in a system with a long history of completely dismissing our symptoms, right? And our voices. I'm saying it again. It is okay to fire your doctor. Maybe you have had that appointment where you got told your labs are normal. So there's nothing to talk about. And you walked out to your car and you just sat there for a minute, 30 minutes, feeling unheard, feeling like maybe you were the problem. I want you to know this. I want you to know that those feelings, all of that is information. That is not something wrong with you. If you have brought up hot flashes or dryness or heart palpitations or mood changes, and in return you've gotten a shrug or maybe even a prescription that doesn't address what you asked about, ladies, that's information too. We are allowed to get a second opinion. We are allowed to ask for a referral to a menopause certified specialist. We are allowed to walk in with our own questions and expect to be treated like a full partner in our own care. We have this right. And guess what? A good provider will actually welcome that. And if a provider keeps dismissing you or doesn't validate your feelings or doesn't hear you or doesn't meet you where you are, it just means it might not be the right fit, which is okay too. It just means it's time to look for someone who will actually listen. That's all. We're going to keep this moving. And don't worry, we are almost done here, just a few more minutes. I want to talk about how we actually prepare for these conversations because a little structure goes a long way. We are now really going to talk a little bit about blood work, specifically FSH, estradiol, a thyroid panel, and a lipid panel. Let's start with FSH. Follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, is like a signal that our brain sends to our ovaries, asking them to keep producing. It tends to rise as the ovaries slow down and stop responding as easily. So a higher FSH can be one piece of the puzzle, though it is not the whole picture since it can bounce around a lot during perimenopause. Let's remember that. This is always just a start. Estradiol, our main form of estrogen, typically declines too. During perimenopause, it can swing rather than drop in a straight line. A full thyroid panel. This one is well worth asking for since thyroid symptoms and perimenopause symptoms can look really similar. The symptoms could be fatigue, weight changes, and mood shifts. So it's important to get a thyroid panel checked. A lipid panel gives us a window into our heart health, which we now know very clearly how much it matters during this transition. Most of us have had the experience of leaving an appointment with a printout full of numbers and letters that we don't fully understand. Just know that it is completely okay to ask your provider to walk you through what each one means and ask them to do it in plain English, plain language, whatever your, you know, language is, rather than just hearing the word normal and then moving on, leaving the office still confused. That DEXA scan we talked about earlier, if you are over 50 and already through menopause, or if you have risk factors for bone loss, it is definitely worth asking your provider directly whether a bone density scan makes sense for you now, rather than waiting until you're 65. Asking is definitely self advocacy. I want to also talk about supplements for a second too, because this industry is huge and not everything on that shelf is what it claims to be. You've probably stood in that supplement aisle staring at three or four different bottles that all claim to help with the same exact thing: sleep, mood, hot flashes. And there's really no real way to know which one, if any, actually works. And here's the part of why that happens. In the United States, dietary supplements, they're not required to be approved by the FDA. They're not required to be approved by the FDA before they hit those shelves in the stores. Unlike prescription medications, which first goes through years of trials, a supplement company can make and sell a product without a single regulator such as the FDA ever even opening the bottle. Dr. Sharon Malone talks about this a lot in her own work, encouraging women to really scrutinize everything they take, even things labeled natural or organic, because honestly, those words are sometimes more a marketing choice and not necessarily a real guarantee of safety. This does not mean that every supplement out there is bad. There are plenty of reputable companies that do their own testing. But if they do their own testing, here's what I want you to know and understand is that this means that the responsibility for accuracy mostly falls on that company itself, not an outside regulator like the FDA. And according to Dr. Malone, mislabeling is genuinely not rare. This is why third party testing matters so much. It just means an independent lab checked what is on the label actually matches what is inside of the bottle. Who would have thought? So when you are choosing a supplement, just look for that third party testing seal, that third party testing label. And last but not least, always, and I mean always, mention any and all supplements you are taking with your doctor, since some supplements can interact with medications in ways that we would not expect or even know of. You can do this by updating your patient portals, but you need to go add this information in there ASAP. And before we wrap this all up, I want to say something to all of you ladies. So many of us carry this quiet shame around this whole stage of life. Like we are supposed to hide it or minimize it or be ashamed and apologize for it somehow. I say this because I have had so many conversations with women who, without realizing, tend to whisper the word menopause as if it was a disease to be ashamed of or making us sound old. I'm here to tell you that there's no reason to be ashamed. There's no reason to be embarrassed or feel like you have to hide it. This is real life. And if I'm going to spend 30, 40, 50 years living in it, I am going to talk about it freely and openly. I have that right. This is not a decline. It is a transition that every woman who is blessed and lucky to live long enough will move and go through. Give yourself permission. We are allowed to talk about our hot flashes at work. We are allowed to ask our friends if they are feeling this too. We are allowed to bring our whole selves. That includes our moods, our questions, symptoms, all of it. We are allowed to bring them into every room we walk into, including and especially the doctor's office. So let's prioritize this. Speaking up for ourselves, it's not about being difficult. It's actually more about refusing to shrink. It's refusing to whisper and instead choosing to show up for ourselves in the same way that we have spent our entire lives showing up for everyone else. I do not want this video to be the only place that you go to for information because one video, let's be honest, even a long one like this one cannot cover everything. So if you want to go deeper on any of the topics and areas that I covered today, I recommend the following, and these are just my own personal recommendations. You may have others, and if you do, please share them in the comments. The first one is Dr. Haver's book, The New Menopause, Dr. Sharon Malone's book, Grown Women Talk, and Dr. Kelly Casperton's book, You Are Not Broken. All of these books are written in a really easy and digestible way, similar to how we've been talking today. And don't worry, you don't need a medical degree to follow along. All of the doctors we talked about today are extremely active on social media too. They're sharing real practical information and it's all free. So I would genuinely encourage you to go follow them. And if you're looking for a provider who actually specializes in this stage of life, the Menopause Society keeps a searchable directory of certified menopause practitioners on their website. And that is often a much better starting point than a general search engine. Don't worry, I will drop all of these in the description below. But before I let you go, I want to be really clear about one more thing. Today was never meant to be a video about how to eat, what exercises to do, or how many steps to get in during the day. This was more about the science, the studies, and really just wanting you to feel seen. Now, excuse me, if a video specifically on nutrition, on movement, and everyday habits during this stage of life is something you would actually want from me, tell me in the comments, please, because I'm genuinely asking, and your answer is going to help shape what videos I make as a part of this series. I want to continue the conversation. I want to continue to help and educate and inspire. This is so important to me. It is a passion project for sure. It's important for all of us. If this video made you feel even a little less alone today, if even one moment made you think, oh my gosh, that is me, how does she know that? I would love for you to tell me in the comments. Tell me which part hit home. Tell me, what are you going through right now? I've said this in so many of my videos. This channel is a safe space for us to say the things we do not always say out loud. And there's no judgment, a place where we give each other grace. And so that means that if you are a Debbie Downer and you leave a negative comment, you will get deleted and you may get blocked. Just saying. And I will say I try my best to read every single comment, and sometimes that doesn't happen. But trust and believe that if I don't, there are so many women in this community that will read them, that will lift you up and will motivate you. This community is top tier, and you guys keep proving yourselves over and over again. And lastly, if this video was helpful, please like the video so that it reaches more women who need to hear it. And it helps the algorithm bring more women over to my channel. And don't forget to subscribe so that we can keep having these conversations together. And finally, can I ask a big favor? Can I ask that you share this video with a friend, a sister, a mother, an aunt, anyone in your life who might be lying awake at 2 or 3 in the morning, desperate and wanting to know that they are not alone? I want you to tell them they're not. She is not. None of us are. And I want you to share this video with them. Thank you so much for sitting with me today, for staying through this whole conversation, and for trusting me with your time. This has been a long time in the making, and I appreciate your patience. We are all in this together, every single one of us. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. And until the next one, adios.